Hey everybody, this is Bob, and welcome to the latest show on the Global Dispatch Radio Network. Now, several days ago, I did a show on how the left-wing media is just wooing New York socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It kind of smells of 2005, 2008, when they fawned all over Barack Obama, making him the poster child of left-wing causes. Now, there were some criticisms I wanted to address from commenters on the YouTube channel, and I want to go over some of these one at a time. And one comment was made, but it was later removed by the commenter, was that I said that Democratic Socialists of America were indeed socialist, and he or she said it's not the same. Well, of course, that's easy enough to check. All we have to do is go online and look at the constitutions and the bylaws of the different political organizations. Now, according to the Democratic Socialists of America Constitution and bylaws, it says, "We are socialists because we share a vision of a humane social order based on popular control of resources and production, economic planning, equitable distribution, feminism, racial equality, and non-oppressive relationships." Then if we look at the Declaration of Principles for, or object, for the Socialist Party USA, it says, "The establishment of a system of society based on the common ownership and democratic control of the means and instruments for producing and distributing wealth by and in the interest of society as a whole." Okay, so you may say, all right, well, that's here in the U.S. Well, let's take a look at the World Socialist Movement object and Declaration of Principles. The establishment of a system of society based upon the common ownership and democratic control of the means and instruments for producing, distributing wealth by and in the interest of the whole community. They all sound pretty much the same in principle. You're really hard-pressed to point out differences. Now, if there is a difference, if you look a little bit further into the Democratic Socialists of America Constitution, it says, "At the root of our socialism is a profound commitment to democracy as means and end." Well, what is democracy? It's government by the people, or the rule of the majority. It could be considered mob rule in some places. We've seen this happen. And the United States is indeed a republic and not a democracy. Accurately defined, democracy is a form of government in which the people decide policy matters directly, like through town hall meetings, voting for ballot initiatives, etc. A republic, on the other hand, is a system in which the people choose representatives who, in turn, make policy decisions on their behalf. And the framers of the Constitution were altogether fearful of pure democracy. Everything they read and studied taught them that pure democracies were and have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Scary stuff, and we do see that in many countries around the globe. Another comment came from Jay, and Jay writes, "This guy," meaning me, "claims all countries with democratic socialism have failed. WTF is he smoking?" Well, Jay, I'm not smoking anything, but as I've already pointed out, socialism and democratic socialism are essentially two sides of the same coin. And that really segues into the next commenter. So yes, all socialist countries eventually do fail. Some democratic socialist countries have had to make very specific maneuvers to avoid going down the path of Venezuela and other countries like that. And that goes into the next comment from David's 2 cents. And he writes, man, all of our major allies have been doing what she is wanting to do, Ocasio-Cortez, for decades. And then he goes on to list a bunch of European countries, Canada and Australia. Well, David, let's go ahead and look at an example of Sweden, right? Socialists love to point out Sweden as how a really heavily socialist regulated economy can outperform a free market capitalist one. But if you go back just in recent history, we see that socialism nearly ruined Sweden and free market incentives had to be brought back. Now, Sweden was once the freest, least regulated, and least taxed country in Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They avoided 2 world wars, and they enjoyed the highest per capita income growth in the world from 1870 to 1950. But right around the 1930s, some fascist, and when that fell out of favor, socialist planning caught the fancy of Swedish politicians, and the welfare state in the country began. Taxes and public debt, the number of government employees expanded in Sweden in a major way. And the country was essentially living off the sweat, the wealth, and the entrepreneurship of previous generations. Then, of course, what always happens with socialism, economic reality sets in. In the 1980s, economic growth collapsed, bubbles burst, and the decline led to a revolt against the socialist ways. So how did they get back to some of the resemblance of an economic normalcy? Well, my God, they did the following. They did tax cuts, deregulation, and deep spending cuts, all contrary to the socialist ideals of people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Point is, if Sweden didn't make some of these moves, where might they be now? And then there's the issue that the newer generation of Swedes have only known this way, this socialist way, and everything's right? Free education, free healthcare, etc. The same things that socialists want to bring here. Well, Sweden's story is not that unique of so-called democratic socialist countries. But there's a point to remember. No one can have a right to such material things like healthcare, education, housing, etc., unless someone else can be compelled to pay for them. Then David goes on to say in his comment, he goes on to say that you guys keep on bringing up that one S-hole country, speaking of Venezuela, that base their economy on the price of crude oil. Well, David, Venezuela was not destroyed by low oil prices. It was destroyed by high socialism. Socialism led Venezuela to an unparalleled economic disaster. And no, it's not the price of oil. Venezuela was the only OPEC country that has fallen into default, depression, and hyperinflation. It's not the oil, it's the socialism. The disaster is not because of low oil prices. It's a reflection of the reality of what socialism does. No oil-producing country shows such atrocious figures as far as hyperinflation and everything else. Not even close. Now, Venezuela is undergoing the typical collapse of a country that has been subject to years of all kinds of political interventions. The fall in oil price is an external shock that brings to light the embarrassing result of years of price controls, currency controls, nationalizations, uncontrolled monetary creation, and state control of the economic and social matters. Another commenter wrote, his name is Kurt DK55, greetings from Denmark. All the policies that I have heard Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez advocating for is everyday centrist mainstream policies here. We're going to get to that in a minute. funny, I was just about to mention that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually has a bachelor's degree in economics, and I did mention that. Then he goes on to say, and she also has a degree in international relations. So she both has clear ideas and knowledge of how to pay for it and knows about it, how other countries do things. Okay, two things about Kurt's comment. Let's start with the latter. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez has no clue. She has not explained one iota on how she would pay for any of the goodies that she wants to pass out. Not once. I would love to hear her come on any TV show and start explaining how she would do that. And then going to the beginning of Kurt's comment, Denmark has a pretty similar story as that of Sweden. More than a quarter of the working age population were on the government dole not that long ago. 1.5 million of approximately 5.5 million people lived full-time on taxpayer-funded handouts. Taxes were out of control. To buy a car was 180% tax. They had green taxes on everything. But in the 2000s, voters went back and fought back. And they brought free market principles back to bring back some economic reality and sanity to Denmark. Now, Tom Mac Maz writes, how do we pay for a military budget that is bigger than the next 12 countries combined? How do we pay for tax cuts for the rich? Well, Tom, you're right. Why are we funding such a massive military? I agree. We shouldn't be if the role of the military was to defend the country and not to be an offensive force with bases all over the world. Concerning tax cuts, Tom, if you're employed or if you're an employer, you are definitely benefiting from the tax cuts. One person once said, pretty wise, socialism always promises heaven and gives hell. Well, if you want to check out more, go to theglobaldispatch.com for your news and views. Again, that's theglobaldispatch.com.